I just want to highlight, to thank both of you for your remarks, and some things that struck me. So the emphasis that you both made on solutions, I think that's something really important for us to be hearing. Edwin ended his remarks saying that there will be an Indigenous Peoples Pavilion in Paris, and that they will be sharing their solutions to these challenges that we all face in that pavilion. And I thought that was brilliant and very positive. And you, Chief, talked about hope, and that was very welcome. I mean, after walking us through and reminding us of the dire situation of this gap and describing it from different angles, then your next words were hope. And that is fantastic to see that you do see that path to hope and to positive change, as you said. And in your final remarks, also going back to that belief that if we work together, if we create the right alliances, we can all benefit from this. So I thank you for those thoughts. And then I think something that is very familiar to all of us in this room is your emphasis on rights. Both of you talking about, of course, self-determination, but about the importance of having rights, Indigenous rights, human rights, at the basis of anything and everything we do moving forward. And I think, you know, that's something that civil society and development practitioners have been talking about and pushing in the fora that we intervene in as something essential as well, and that we believe is fundamental for sustainable development as well. So thank you both for those remarks. And I am not going to speak anymore. Maybe one more thing, and it's that vision that you've brought to the table of leadership for Canada, which is, again, has been a theme for us in this conference. Is something that we work on a lot. I think that's what we all want to elevate, is how do we all do our bit so that we can, as a nation, as a country, as peoples, show more leadership at home and abroad. So I thank you for those comments as well. So we'll start with microphone number 1.
Hello, thanks to both the panelists. My question is primarily for the Canadian representative here. Chief, I would love to hear what you hope to see at the end of May, beginning of June, when the Truth and Reconciliation Commission is celebrated and is marked and is honored, particularly from the general public that maybe hasn't been included. So if you would just, what's your best vision of what might happen during those days across the country? Thanks.
Again, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, their final report's coming down June 1, 2, and 3, May 31st. There's 4 days in Ottawa here. And I haven't seen their final report. But I'm hoping that there's recommendations on how to bring about reconciliation. And I'll use a couple of examples. I'm hoping that the recommendations that will, first of all, that whatever's recommended will be implemented. So, like, we've had so many studies. You know, we had the Royal Commission on Aboriginal People study. There's been so many justice studies. But the heck is the use of a study if there's nothing actionable or implementable, right? So there's got to be implementation of recommendations. So as an example, here's 2 or 3 points for recommendation that I would like to see. I would hope that there'd be recommendations that all provincial governments change their curriculums to teach treaties and inherent rights and Aboriginal rights in the school systems from K to 12. That's one recommendation. The second recommendation would also to teach the history of colonization in the residential schools. You have to teach residential schools. That's Canada's dark legacy. You know, it was cultural genocide. That has to be taught. So there's a greater awareness amongst the people growing through schools of why they see, you know, because people don't understand, the stereotype of First Nations people. All they do is see them in the cities and they're begging for money, or the poor side, you know, there's so much alcohol abuse, there's so much violence amongst the communities. Well, why is that? There's 2 reasons why that happens in our communities. 1, the imposition of the residential schools, which was cultural genocide. Number 2, the imposition of the Indian Act, which has been there since 1876. Between those 2 things, you know, we can, so if they're taught in the school systems, that'll help people understand and get a good background. The third recommendation, because we have over 58 different Indigenous nation languages in Canada. Unfortunately, some of the languages are on the verge of extinction. You know, And I thought, we're bad in Canada. I looked at my colleague here. They have 400 Indigenous nation languages in the Amazon territory. That's even more challenging. But here in Canada, We have 58. And so the importance and recognition of language, that has to be recognized. And I'll use the Northwest Territories as an example. They've recognized their 11 Indigenous languages as official languages of the territory in NWT. Fantastic. And it doesn't mean that we have to change the Official Languages Act. Mais oui, je parle français un petit peu. En français, s'il vous plaît, la belle province de Québec. C'est bon. Or anglais. English and French. Like, in a respectful way, we say, Canada wasn't just founded on 2 founding nations. So that's we say in respect, a myth. There are Indigenous nations here, and who had a huge hand to play. So, curriculum changes, in those 3 areas. On the economic side, I would hope that there would be economic reconciliation, that they would recommend that there would be true economic reconciliation in the area of sharing land and resources. Again, I comment about revenue sharing, looking at ways, and that's value added. That's job creation, that's also wealth creation, but environmental protection is part of that, okay? So our involvement there, I would hope to see recommendations in that front. Duty, consult, and accommodate. Table. And so across Canada, there are tables now in those fronts. It's starting to happen. So recommendations in that front. But I would also recommend, I would hope, that they'd make a recommendation that all the newcomers to Canada, and this is something that I would like to see in 2 fronts, that all the newcomers coming to Canada, all the immigrants we call them, or people call them, Canada has a policy, they're going to accept so much immigrants coming to Canada, right? They should be taught what we just taught, treaties and inherent rights. They should be taught about residential schools. And before they're getting sworn in as official Canadians, that they should know about Indigenous peoples. That's one piece. And then a recommendation that all 338 members of Parliament take that same training. That's another piece. So those are just some quick that I'm hoping for. But again, it's all about working together and raising the consciousness and awareness. Missing and murdered Indigenous women and children, there's so much things. But it's only by creating a forum for dialogue that we're going to bring about change. And that's going to be policy and legislative change. And we have to have those forums. And so I know I'm going on, but there's lots more to say, but that's just some quick ideas for you, okay?
Thank you very much. April.
Hi there, April Ingham from Pacific Peoples Partnership based on Vancouver Island and Coast Salish Territories. One of the most exciting pieces of the work that we do is linking Indigenous peoples north-south. And that's for knowledge exchange and also to share best practices, stories for language revitalization and cultural revitalization, and also for rights and for looking at strategies for how to improve life for all. And I'm really excited to see you sitting there together, and it seems like you're working together, and I would just like to know a little bit more about the benefits that you see of the partnership of working together with Indigenous peoples north-south.
Excellent question. Thank you. So we'll ask both of you to respond to that.
I'll do a quick response, and then AFN has a protocol with COICA already, and we're looking at renewing it again. And some of the things that we're going to look at is an economic change in terms of best practices. They have challenges negotiating impact benefit agreements with industry in their territories. Well, we have some expertise and knowledge from some of our Indigenous peoples that have concluded successful arrangements with business that we could probably share. So information exchange in that one area, economy, in that piece. There could be also educational exchanges, student exchanges, and getting their Indigenous people students educated, within the nation state called Canada, at some of our institutions, like the First Nations University of Canada, to assist them. So we talked about that. But as well, we can enlist their support, to make sure that we have a really good strategy when we go to the United Nations forums, to help make presentations to the different institutions of the UN, like the Committee for Elimination of Racial Discrimination, like the Universal Periodic Review. Like, we can work together to make sure we're all on the same page as Indigenous peoples, because their view is our view of the world. Like, it's almost like arm in arm, and that's why we asked if we can find a way to go down to work with them, and hopefully we can do that. And I mentioned, I don't want to just sign it, this thing between AFN and COICO. You have to bring life to it. And so in the area of the economy, or dealing with industry, or even if there's Canadian industries down there doing dreadful things to the land and water, that we can help lobby here as well and put pressure on them, you know, as Canadian companies, you know, to not to exploit their territory water. Like, we also share that idea. So that's 2 or 3 examples of how we can look at working together. And I look forward to working with my Indigenous brother.
Edwin, creo que Joana te explicó la pregunta, pero es hablar un poco del valor que tú ves en esta colaboración entre los pueblos indígenas a nivel global, ¿no?
Este acuerdo mutuo entre los pueblos indígenas de la cuenca amazónica del sur a norte, de parte de la COICA, es muy importante por diferentes actores. Uno, de que entre COICA y AFN, dentro del marco del sistema de Naciones Unidas, podemos estar juntos, haciendo revalorizar nuestra cultura, nuestros derechos, para que nuestros gobiernos, tanto en la cuenca amazónica, así como no reconoce ni protege los derechos de los pueblos indígenas aquí en Canadá, que un país desarrollado, mucho menos en nuestros países de subdesarrollo.
Yes. Okay, so he says that the MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding between AFN and COICA, is very important from the COICA side because they can form a united front at the United Nations and stand together to advocate for the rights of Indigenous people for everyone globally. He's saying, you know, you can imagine if here in Canada, a developed country, that the rights of Indigenous peoples are not respected. Can you imagine what happens in developing countries? So he sees us strength in this partnership in that front.
Por ejemplo, nosotros de la COICA nos reunimos con la delegación oficial de Canadá dentro del marco del cambio climático de la COP20 en Lima. A nosotros nos hablaron maravillas de que ellos están haciendo a favor de los pueblos indígenas. Entonces, si nosotros conocemos cosas que no están funcionando bien, nosotros podemos hacer recomendación, por ejemplo.
Okay, so he's actually saying, for example, it's good that we have a partnership and we get information that can be valuable. Last COP20 on climate change in Lima, COICA met with the Canadian delegation and they spoke about all the wonderful things that they're doing for Indigenous peoples here in Canada. And now that he knows, you know, that things are different, that would be good to be able to have that position to challenge those ideas.
En el otro de los temas ya interno entre nosotros, a nosotros nos interesa de tener la experiencia de varios años justamente de AFN internamente sobre el tema de explotación hidrocarburífera dentro de sus territorios, cosa que nosotros no lo tenemos, que faltan herramientas adecuadas para una muy buena negociación frente al gobierno y a las empresas petroleras, y como también en el sector minero y el sector forestal. Esa experiencia nos gustaría tener. Y el otro tema de experiencia es el tema de educación, de formación y profesionalización.
Okay, so that's one on the international side, but internally he would like COICA would like to have and benefit from the experience that Indigenous people here in Canada might have with resource extraction and dealing with extractives and governments, especially with negotiation tools. They don't in the COICA, they don't have that experience in the Amazon. Also with not only with the oil industry, but the mining sector and the forestry. So they would like to learn from the experiences here in Canada from the Indigenous people. Also, there's also the component of education and capacity building. There needs to be professional development for their young people, and this is what the National Chief was speaking to about made possible exchange or higher education. They have no capacity in terms of negotiation, so when extractives show up in the Amazon, there's quite the disadvantage in the tables, at the negotiating tables.
Thank you. Gracias, Eden. So you are right. We have been here for 3 days, actually. Yes. But this is a wonderful crowd. I know everybody is hanging on to every word that both of you are saying. So I'm going to invite you to make a final remark. What I would invite you to comment on, as you know, the people in this room are development practitioners. We're international development practitioners. Some organizations are already working in Canada on domestic issues, including with First Nations. But basically our main area of focus of work and of expertise is in international development work. And I know many of us are asking ourselves, and we are being challenged by our supporters to try to find what value added we can bring to working with Indigenous peoples, not only internationally, but also in Canada, but also helping to make these links, as that question that was posed earlier pointed to. So I'd like you to share your quick thoughts to conclude on where do you see this community playing an important role in some of the challenges and solutions that you were pointing out. Y después le voy a repetir a Edwin la pregunta en español.
Okay. Just very quickly again, and it's a good question in terms of, there's a lot of international development practitioners. The value added you all can bring is, I always say it this way, education leads to awareness, leads to understanding, leads to action. And we have October 19th, there's a federal election coming up. So getting behind our issues, if you will help us. Telling your local MP or anybody running in your territory, looking at treaty implementation processes is a good thing for Indigenous peoples. Looking at a new fiscal relationship to close the gap is a good thing for First Nations people. Looking at changing the curriculum is a good thing, just get behind those things, So, in fact, as Assembly of First Nations, we're trying to get all of our issues onto every party platform, So I'm meeting with the NDP caucus, meeting with the Liberal caucus, meeting with the Conservative caucus, and trying to get all of these issues onto their party platforms. And we're trying to mobilize the First Nations vote, because we can influence 51 ridings if we get out vote. But remember, we didn't get the right to vote until 1961. Up until 1961, we didn't have the right to vote. And so, I urge you all, as fellow citizens of the two-legged nation, the two-legged tribe, to get behind our issues as well, and educate yourselves about them, but influence the members of Parliament. That revenue sharing is a concept that's time. It's time, and make investments now in the fastest growing segments of Canada's population. That's good for everybody. Get behind access to potable water. 92 communities that don't have potable water. No access to potable water. All of those things. That's what I would encourage you. So you can help by bringing about that policy and legislative change with the appropriate people getting elected. And that's what I encourage you to do. We can build partnerships. And because we're all connected, we're all related. We're the two-legged nation here, and we've got to work together. So that's my comments on that. Okay.
Edwin, entonces, para concluir, si podría compartir con nosotros cómo ve usted el rol de los grupos que hacen cooperación internacional, como la gente que está hoy reunida aquí. ¿Cuál es el valor que podemos traer para aportar esas soluciones de las que usted estaba hablando?
Bien, es un valor agregado muy importante de parte de estos sectores de la cooperación internacional y las ONGs para los pueblos indígenas, que no solamente llevan recursos humanos, sino también conocimientos, herramientas, para que parte de estos problemas puedan justamente incidir hacia la población y asimismo la población tener esa herramienta adecuada para poder tener sus propias soluciones. Por ejemplo,
he sees the role for this kind of cooperation and organizations, and as an important and very valuable role to make the connections and be able to share to build human capacity, resource capacity, because that's what there is mostly needed to be able to bring about these solutions.
Muchas de las cooperaciones, si el gobierno no tiene programa de educación como política de Estado, estas cooperaciones nos ayudan a solucionar parte de estos problemas en tema de educación intercultural bilingüe, que no sea una educación impuesta, sino una educación de acuerdo a su propia realidad. Si es que yo estoy hablando español, es porque los españoles nos han colonizado. Y si nosotros hubiéramos colonizado los pueblos indígenas, estaría hablando los españoles mi idioma. Por ello.
Se nos complicaría mucho la traducción.
All right, so he's saying that this cooperation is very valuable, especially in the framework of education, especially when it's not coming from the government. It has to be a respectful cultural education and not an imposed education. So he was saying, for example, I'm speaking to you here in Spanish because the Spaniards colonized us, but if I would have colonized the Spaniards, I would be speaking my language to you now.
Por ejemplo, otra de las políticas más aún que está de moda, que los gobiernos no quieren reconocer ni tampoco adoptar, es el tema del cambio climático. Están en reuniones y reuniones gastando miles y millones de dólares, en lugar de apoyar y aportar a los que realmente cuidan, que somos nosotros los pueblos indígenas, lo gastan y no están haciendo nada. Por ejemplo, las áreas naturales protegidas que maneja el gobierno son las más desprotegidas que los territorios de los pueblos indígenas. ¿Por qué están más protegidos los territorios de los pueblos indígenas? ¿Quién no cuida su casa? A igual que ustedes cuidan su casa, que no entren los ladrones, pues así también nosotros cuidamos los pueblos indígenas, nuestro territorio, que no vengan empresas petroleras que hagan lo que quieran, gobiernos que entregan por entregar, sin saber y sin conocer si existen o no indígenas, simplemente le den la Amazonía verde como si fuese que ahí no existe nada, solamente árboles, animales y insectos, y somos nosotros los que defendemos, pero sin cambio a la final ni siquiera nos consultan y simplemente legislan en contra nuestra. Como alternativa para que eso se solucione, estamos pensando nosotros los pueblos indígenas estar donde que realmente se decide. ¿Dónde? En el Parlamento o la Presidencia de la República. Llegará ese momento y gobernarnos, no solamente para los pueblos indígenas, sino para todos. No soy candidato por si acaso, gracias.
All right, okay, let's see. So there is a policy that's been going around in the international landscape, which is about climate change. And states seem reluctant to adopt it, and they can continue to spend billions and billions of dollars in meetings that lead nowhere, instead of supporting the indigenous peoples who are actually the stewards of the land. For example, government protected areas are the least protected areas. Whereas by comparison, indigenous territories are actually, where indigenous peoples are actually able to protect their territories, are better protected than those protected areas from the government. And that's simple, because it's their home. It's our home, and just like you protect your home from thieves and people to come and pollute your home, so do we. And instead, the government hands out our territory. They just see the Amazon as this green territory that is theirs to give out without our free, prior, for consent. They make legislation, they give out our lands, they give out our rights. And it's just working against us. And this is why we feel that now we have to get to where the actual decisions are being made, which is at government and presidency or whatever system of government the states have. But he's not running, just so you know, he's not running politically.
Muchas gracias, Edwin. Okay, so we're ready to conclude, but I'm going to give the
got one
last little word.
No,
Yes,
just
thank
this
you.
30 seconds, because this is an international forum, you know, and I'd be remiss if I didn't ask for your help in getting nation states and provincial governments to look at implementation of the UNDRIP, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And I'll hold up the new Premier in Alberta, Premier Rachel. She's publicly stated that they're going to look at implementing the UNDRIP or adopting it as a provincial legislation. That'll be the first one, because it really is more than an aspirational document. It really is more than an aspirational document. It's a bare minimum in terms of international fundamental human rights in the world, and we can build upon that. So that's one piece I wanted to say. And my colleague, again, my brother here, is from the Witutu. That's his nation, his indigenous language, Witutu. You know, Nistamina Pixikuit Neheon, Cree. You know, I'm Cree. And why that's important? Because in the world's eyes, and when we talk about self-determination, we need 5 things as indigenous peoples. We need our own land, our own laws, our own identifiable peoples, populations, our own identifiable governments, and our own languages. That importance of language is so vital, not only to our survival and to our worldview and to our ceremonies, but even when you link it to self-determination. You know, and so that's very key. You know, anything you can do to help with that whole language promotion, it's linked to self-determination in the world sense. So I wanted to share those 2 points, and there's lots more we could say about the need for research and development in alternative energy, you know, solar, sun, geothermal, but that's another time.
Okay.